Flowering dogwood is Virginia's state tree and its state flower. So basically it covers both things. It's a wonderful, wonderful flower, wonderful tree with all sorts of ethnobotanical ties to it. But more importantly, it does provide a ton of wildlife food, both when it's in flower like this, where you can see the bracts. They're actually not those aren't petals; they're actually bracts. The flowers are actually little things inside the middle of all of this, rather than the actual what you're looking at, which is really a bract. But anyways, they're flowers. These will form beautiful red drupes in the fall, a favorite of birds, but they're certainly useful now by a variety of different kinds of things. And you can see that these are some really neat flowers. All sorts of legends and folklore behind it. Because the petals, the bracts, are almost in the shape of a cross. This had all sorts of symbolic meanings as well. It was thought through Christian legend that this was symbolic of Christianity. The cross, and inside was supposedly the crown of thorns. Later on, the colorful drupes that developed, would also be a symbolic of blood. But more importantly, these little, on the tips of each of the bracts are these little marks that supposedly were signs where the nails were drawn into the cross. Anyways, all sorts of Christian legend. But it was also medicinally quite an important plant. This was used, especially during the Civil War, as a substitute for quinine, which of course wasn't available from Peru and other places in South America. So they used this to treat malaria and so forth. But it's got other uses as well. Some people think the name dogwood came to us thanks to its use for dog baths, because it was supposedly some of the chemicals in there were good for getting rid of pests and parasites on dogs. Other people think it's just a corruption of dagger wood, because these things actually were useful for, it's very dense little wood. Now it doesn't grow like to be a big tree, but was useful for cooking and for making little daggers to store your food and cook it on. But you know, that's yet another use for the tree and how it got its name. There's several different kinds of dogwoods, but this is the biggest one that we have, and unfortunately it's in trouble. Dogwoods are being affected by anthracnose, a fungus that was brought over probably in the Kusa, Korean dogwood, and unfortunately affect our own dogwoods quite badly. But what ends up happening is, as birds come and feed on the berries, well they're not real berries, they're called something else botanically, but regardless, the fruits, they land on there and pick up the fungus, and as they continue in their migration feeding, they spread the fungus everywhere that they grow. So their own birds that used to be the means that they spread the seeds ends up being what's also killing this particular kind of tree. And the anthracnose is pretty nasty. It starts to make cuts in the wood, and then the thing wilts and dies. So that is, of course, a problem. When this thing does become berries, it'll have some flagging foliage. It actually turns, the foliage starts to change color just as the berries. The fruits are becoming colorful, and so it becomes an indicator so that the tree is pretty small. It can be seen from far away, and animals and birds can fly down to it and so forth and get the food. I'm going to move real quickly. Hopefully it doesn't bother you guys too much, but I wanted to show you that it does have interesting corky alligator-like bark, which is typical of the larger trees, and one way you can also tell it apart from everything else. This particular tree also has opposite branching. So everywhere there is a branch, there's usually another one that's opposite it, and so that's another thing that's unusual amongst most plants. And all dogwoods have that particular trait to them. So a small growing tree, a favorite of birds and all sorts of wildlife, the state tree of Virginia, as well as the state flower. A beautiful plant that hopefully will hang on. Hopefully they can survive the anthracnose, the fungus, and continue to be a very important part of our landscape, not just for how pretty that they look, but for also their usefulness as habitat plants for a lot of other animals. Flowering dogwood, Cornus floridia.